Welcome to Olivia's Blooms. If you are new to my channel, I'm gardening in Charlottesville, Virginia, Zone 7B. I'm a home gardener who loves growing my own cut flowers and home decor with a focus on sustainable, regenerative, and eco-friendly practices. But most importantly, I'm here to support, share with, and learn from other gardeners, so I hope you will join me in growing this amazing gardening community. Hey guys, welcome back to Olivia's Blooms. I'm really excited because today I'm going to be showing you how to soil block. I'm finally starting my cool season flowers. It's January, so it's time for me here in Charlottesville to start off those flowers that like the cool weather. I'm going to show you how to make soil blocks. To me, it's a super easy process. And then I'm going to just share with you a little soil blocking experiment that I'm doing to try out different soils just for fun. All right, so first let's start off by making my last batch of soil that I am testing. The last soil mix that I am trialing is Lisa Mason Ziegler's soil mix, but with coco coir instead of peat moss. I'm trying to find ways to use less peat in my gardening. You find it in a lot of places, but it can be harmful on the environment in terms of its harvesting process. So I'm trying to find local potting soil that's peat-free, but I have not been able to find it. So I'm trying coco coir. That's been easier to find. So this recipe, and I'll put her recipes below in a link to them, but it is 16 parts coco coir to 4 parts sifted compost to 1/2 part of her nutrient mix, which is rock phosphate and green sand. Now I know that sounds complicated. You do not need to make soil blocking this complicated. You can use regular potting soil and add a few amendments. But again, I'm just trying this for fun. So I've got that mix here ready to go. And the first step is to moisten it. Moistening the soil is really important. You're not going to be able to form those blocks if the soil is not moist enough. Something really important to know is that you want to make soil for soil blocks a lot more moist than you would for a seed tray. For a seed tray, generally, you're looking for the soil to hold together but not squeeze out moisture. You want it a lot wetter than that for your soil blocks. Now, it is an art. It's not a science. There's not one magical, this is exactly how much soil to exactly how much water, because your soil is going to be different amounts of moist versus dry depending on if it's been in open storage or what time of year it is. I know I've come across potting soil that is bone dry, or if my potting soil has been out in the rain or in my garage while it's raining, it carries a lot more moisture. So what I do is generally I start with 3 parts soil to 1 part water, and I see how it looks. What you'll be looking for is more of a texture. Lisa Mason Ziegler calls it an oatmeal texture. I like to, if I scoop soil around, if there's a tiny bit of a trail of water, to me that's just right. You'll get the hang of it once you do it. But let me show you first. I'm going to start with 3 parts of this soil mix to 1 part water. And you don't need to use a fancy measuring cup. What I use is just a glass jar. All right, here's part of my experiment, and I'll show you what other soils I'm trialing, but let me get this out of the way. If you watched my previous video about what equipment you'll need, you'll have known that I prefer this container for mixing my soil for soil blocking, and because it has a nice flat surface. So I'm going to add 3 jars of the potting mix to 1 part water. Now I'm gonna mix it. And I just use this little fork I have from a gift. I know other gardeners use potato mashers, paint scrapers, whatever is your mixing implement of choice, it will work fine. You want to make sure that it is evenly mixed because you don't want some blocks being too dry and others being too wet. We're looking for that oatmeal consistency. This is a lot of mix. I could make trays and trays of the small blocker out of this. If you're not making a lot of seeds, like if I'm only doing a couple trays of 20, I'll probably start with 1 jar of mix and 1/3 of a jar of water. All right, this is looking a little dry, and apologies the lighting isn't better here. See, when I move it around, it's not quite leaving behind a little bit of water, so I'm gonna add just a little more. Just a little bit at a time. It's easier to add water than it is to dry out the soil more, but if you did add too much water, you can just add a little bit more mix in to try and get the consistency back to where it needs to be. And don't be too intimidated by the moisture level. If you're not sure, what I love about soil blocks is you can try one out. Say, oh, nope, that's not right. Dump it right back in and try again. All right, this is looking pretty good to me. Let me show you close up. Okay, here's a closer look in some better lighting at what I think is the best consistency for soil blocking. You can see it does resemble oatmeal, and when I move it around, it leaves just a little trail of water behind. But sometimes I have to make a soil block and I've got it wrong and I have to add a little water. It's no problem. You'll get the hang of it and get better as you do it more. Now let's make some soil blocks. Before I make my blocks, I like to make sure that I label my tray because often I will forget. So here's the tray I'm going to put my first small 20 block section on. These are the other 3 potting soils I'm trialing. I've already labeled it with what the potting soil mix is and the date. So next, I'm going to show you both the small and the large. I'm going to show you how to use the small blocker to make soil blocks. The first step is you want to make sure you've got a lot of soil in one place. If the soil's too spread out, it can be hard to fill these evenly. And then I hold it by this metal piece right here. I try not to hold this because what ends up happening is I start pushing it out while I'm making the soil block. So I try and only hold it by this piece here and then just wiggle it down all the way to the bottom and really press it down. See my wiggle motion? And I usually do that about twice with the small blocker. It's a little trickier with the big blocker in my experience. I check the bottom and you can just make sure that all the blocks are filled, and then I scrape off the excess soil just with the back of my little tool here, and that's to make sure that the surface these are on is going to be even, but it also helps save soil so you're not wasting any. Okay, now that I have my block, I am going to just place it directly down, and I like to press down as I push the handle up. And then I'll check and see how'd they do. Those look good to me. They're definitely not perfect, but these will work. They don't have to be perfect to grow beautiful transplants. Now, already I can tell that Lisa Mason Ziegler's 2 recipes make much nicer soil blocks than the first 2 I tried that used the potting mix. But in hindsight, I probably should have sifted the potting mix because you don't want big chunks in your mix. It makes the soil blocks not so uniform and a little bit bumpy. So I'll probably sift this next time if I want to try it again. And Lisa Mason Ziegler's recipes are using sifted components, so that's probably why they make these nice, even blocks. Now let me show you the big blocker. The big blocker I find is a little bit harder to fill. I usually need to do 1 or 2 more sweeps to make sure all of the holes are filled, but still pretty easy to use. Same principle, I hold it here, I press down and wiggle. And again, make sure that there's a lot of soil in one area, especially with a wide blocker like this. You don't want one block missing out. You can see me wiggling down here. I've done 2. It actually worked out pretty well that time. I press down on these just to make sure that they're fully filled. Scrape it off again. And then this is the last row here. Same principle. I'm going to press down on this handle and press down on the whole soil blocker while I pull up the bar. And that made some beautiful soil blocks. If your soil is too wet and heavy, I find that it can often fall out of the blocks, especially on the large one. So if it gets to that point, you can turn the blocker upside down and just hand fill. It's not ideal, but see how 2 of these are empty and 2 is full? Especially as you start using up the soil, I noticed that a lot of the water gets squeezed out and the soil tends to be a little more moist at the end. It doesn't seem to harm the plants themselves, just makes it a little bit trickier. The next step is to add the seeds. Before we do that, I'm going to just tell you a little bit more about my experiment and the soil types I'm using. So I am trying 2 different types using potting soil. One has a wool pellet as the nutrient amendment, and Bree from Blossom and Branch Farm recommends that as a sustainable and really great soil blocking mix. So I'm trying it out. I ordered my wool pellets on Amazon, but if I really like that recipe, I might try and source them locally. This one is potting soil plus Lisa Mason Ziegler's nutrient mix, which I bought directly from the Gardener's Workshop, but you can mix up your own. Up here, I have Lisa Mason Ziegler's recipe that she uses, and it is 16 parts sifted peat moss to 4 parts sifted compost to a half part of her nutrient mix. And this is the same thing, but it replaces peat moss with coco coir. I'm trying out both of the small and the large soil blocks so I can really test out how they work. Now, this is going to be challenging for me, this large tray, because if you watched my previous video, I mentioned that you want to start all of the same types of seeds on the same tray. I am going to be trying different types of seeds on this tray because I don't have the space or the right number of trays to put them all on separate trays, so I'm going to baby these a little bit. I'll put humidity domes on them individually and then take them off as the seeds sprout. So it's going to be a little tricky. Hopefully these should all germinate around the same time because these are all going to be snapdragons. In these 4 here, I'm going to be trying a mix of stock. In these 4 here, I'm going to be trying a mix of yarrow. And in these 4 here, I'm going to be trying a mix of sweet peas. Now let me show you how to seed a soil block. This is not normally where I sow my seeds. I usually do them on my table, but I wanted to give you the best lighting so that you can hopefully see the process really well. I've already seeded these 3, and these are the blocks we just made right here. I have put my snapdragon seeds here in my seed tray, and you can see because they're so tiny, the tray really helps with visibility, and also I can move them around easily if I need to because there's no static electricity. Just a side note, I bought a couple of these on Gardener's Workshop website, but I got one of these free with my redemption seed orders. What an awesome bonus. I also have one of these filled with water, and that's because I'm going to moisten the toothpick every time it gets dry to help pick up these tiny seeds. And all I'm going to do is dip my toothpick into the water. I'm going to pick up one seed that is impossible to see, and I am just going to go along and do one seed per cell. And you want to make sure the seed has contact. One little trick that I do, because sometimes I'm in the middle of seeding and my mind wanders and then I go, uh-oh, which one was I on? Is I like to count in my head so that if I'm at, let's say, 10, and I turn back and forgot which one I'm on, I can count and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, I'm right here. And that has saved my butt more times than I can tell you. See, like right now, I forgot where I was. Let's just say here. And if you end up with more than one per block, it's not a problem, but you are going to have to end up removing one of them. This looks like a lot of blocks, but it's pretty quick and easy to seed them this way. An important part of seed starting in general that's not specific to soil blocking is that you want to make sure you have the best information about your seeds. Different seeds like different conditions in order to germinate. Some need light, some need darkness. Some like it cooler, especially those cool season hardy annuals, and some like it really warm. You can find that information online. Johnny's Seeds has tons and tons of information. I don't think there's any question I've had that I haven't found an answer to there. And what you can do is, with soil blocking, snapdragons are easy. They just need to be surface sown. But if a seed says it needs to be buried, you can either push it gently into the block with your toothpick, or you can cover up the hole with a little bit of soil or vermiculite. I tend to prefer vermiculite because the soil blocking mix usually that I have left over is really wet and heavy, and it's hard to individually put on top. Now let me show you the stock seeds, which are a little bit bigger and easier to work with. These do like to be buried a little bit, and so I cover them a little more thickly with vermiculite. And then you can control the temperature and the humidity with a heat mat and heat domes. So I've already seeded these 3. I'm going to show you the big one though. I gently place the stalk in. Again, I tap it a couple times to make sure it's really got contact with the soil. It's important for germination. If you really want to make sure you get full germination, you can add 2 seeds. I just personally have a hard time killing off one of the plants, and I find it easier to do 1 per block, especially with things like stock where I usually get really good germination rates. Okay, super easy. And the last steps that I do, I think are important to do. I spray the seeds because you want to make sure those seeds are moist the entire time until they germinate, because if that seedling starts to sprout and then dries out, it can die. So moisture is essential. I use my spray bottle. And then I sprinkle on some vermiculite. For me, I find that it helps with the algae growth. And how much vermiculite I put on will depend on whether or not the seed needs light or is surface sown. So a seed that needs light or is surface sown, I will still do a very light layer of vermiculite. It does allow enough light in for those seeds to germinate. But for something like stock, where it likes to be buried a little bit, I'll put a little bit of a thicker layer, especially in the little holes where the seed is. And then what you want to do is you want to moisten the vermiculite as well, so that it's not absorbing all that moisture that's on top of your seed. Side note here, I've never tried stock in the big blocks. So we'll see how this goes. Mine last year didn't do wonderfully, so I'm trying growing stock 2 different ways this year. First, I tried fall planting it, and now I'm trying it in the big blocks as well. And it's the same process with these smaller seeds. And finally, I'm going to put these on the heat mat and cover them with a plastic dome until they germinate. A couple other quick tips. I like to use old Trader Joe's bags or any kind of brown paper bag, and I will store any leftover dry mix that I have in these, and I'll fold it over and just label it. This is my sifted compost. And I find that it's a great way to store it without having to buy a bunch of containers. But I do like to fold it over just so that if I do start having a fungus gnat problem, if the soil happens to be moist in there, they're not going to be having a ball and laying all their eggs in the soil. Another tip is I leave my seeds on the heat mat until they are at least 50% germinated, and then I move them off the heat mat and under the grow lights. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that you feel confident now that you can make soil blocks, because I'm confident that you can make soil blocks. I'll check back in with you guys in a few weeks so we can see how the seedlings are going in the different soil mixtures. And I hope you had as much fun starting seeds with me today as I did. And share with you a little, what was that?